Today, we're cracking open a rulebook from over half a century ago. But listen, this isn't just some dusty old legal document. No, this is a blueprint that tried to solve what felt like an impossible problem. We're diving deep into the 1966 Mines Vocational Training Rules, a law that literally tried to transform one of the world's most dangerous jobs into a skilled and much safer profession in India.
So, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at why these rules were such a game changer. Then, we'll figure out who had to get trained, and just as importantly, who didn't. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of what miners actually learned, from the basics to advanced skills. And finally, we'll see how the whole system of training centers and certificates made it all official.
All right, so to really get why these rules mattered so much, we have to kind of step back and understand the world they were born into.
I mean, this was the fundamental question facing India's mining industry. For generations, mining had just been this brutal, incredibly high-risk job. The answer that came out in 1966 wasn't just about fancier equipment or more rules on a piece of paper. It was a completely radical shift in how they thought about the miners themselves.
And the solution was these rules. For the very first time, they set up a nationwide, mandatory, and standardized training system. And the core idea? It was absolutely revolutionary for the time. It said that safety isn't just about the gear you wear, it's a skill. A skill that you can teach, you can practice, and you can certify. It was all about empowering the workers who were right there on the front lines.
But, whenever you roll out a massive piece of legislation like this, it immediately brings up a huge question. Who, exactly, does this apply to? And that's a totally fair question, right? You'd think a safety rule would just blanket apply to every single person on site. But the people who wrote these rules were actually really specific about who they were targeting. So here's how they did it. And it's pretty clever. The rule says all persons employed in a mine must be trained, but then it carves out this really fascinating list of exemptions. You see, it's the managers, the engineers, the surveyors who are exempt. The logic seems pretty clear. This training was for the people doing the physical work, the frontline workers, not the supervisors or specialists who already had their own different kinds of qualifications.
So once a worker was flagged for training, what did they actually have to learn? This is where the rules get incredibly detailed and honestly, really practical. Right off the bat, you can see this was not a one-size-fits-all approach. They created these different training paths based on how dangerous the job was. If you were a surface worker, you took a 6-day course, but if you were heading underground, that jumped to 12 days. And for a gassy mine, which is the most hazardous environment, you needed another 6 days of specialized training on top of everything else. And we're not talking about a quick safety briefing here. Just try to imagine this. For almost 2 full weeks, a new miner is in this intensive program, learning the theory and practicing the skills, all before they could even set foot in their actual job. That's a serious commitment to getting people ready. And the rulebook actually lays out this incredibly detailed day-by-day curriculum. It mixed classroom-style talks with hands-on practical work. So, for example, on day 2, a trainee would sit through a lecture on roof control, and then they'd go right into a training gallery to get their hands dirty, learning how to set props and build chocks, the actual timber structures holding the roof up. It was all about theory immediately followed by practice. But this might be the most brilliant part of the whole training. On the final day, they took trainees on a special tour called the Underground What's Wrong visit. Think of it like a final exam in the real world. The goal wasn't to show them a perfectly safe workspace. It was to train their eyes to spot the hazards, the mistakes, the dangers in a real setting. That is just fantastic, active, preventative safety training.
Now, the training didn't just stop after the first couple of weeks. Not at all. The rulebook was smart enough to account for a miner's entire career, making sure that skills were not only learned, but also kept sharp and built on over time.
Once a miner had the basics down, they could actually start to specialize. For these really high-stakes jobs, like a timber mystery who's responsible for the mine's support structures, or a shot fire in charge of all the blasting, the rules required even more specific, intensive training. This created a real career path for workers to become certified experts in a seriously dangerous craft.
And get this, the system had a built-in safety net so that skills never got rusty. If a worker was away from the job for more than a year, they couldn't just walk back in and start working. They had to take a mandatory refresher course within 1 month of returning. It was a brilliant defense against complacency.
So having all these great rules is one thing, but enforcing them across thousands of mines? Well, that required a really solid system of centers and certificates to make the whole thing official.
This was the absolute foundation of the whole system. The rules were crystal clear. Every single mine owner, and it wasn't optional, had to establish and run an official training center with approved staff and equipment. Now, smaller mines could team up, but the responsibility was clear. The owners had to provide the place for this education to happen.
Now, this might be my favorite little detail in this entire document. How do you make sure the best, most experienced people are doing the training? You incentivize them. The rules said that an experienced worker who was mentoring a trainee during the practical work would get paid an extra ½ rupee per day for each trainee. It's a tiny amount, but it formalized mentorship. It put a real value on passing down that hard-won knowledge.
And all of this training, all this hard work, it all led to a formal certification process. First, you had to complete the course at an approved center. Then, you had to pass an oral interview with a training officer to prove you actually understood what you were taught. Only then would you get your official certificate, which you then had to give to the mine manager to keep on file as proof you were qualified.
And believe me, that certificate, it was everything. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a miner's passport to work. The rules even said it had to have a photograph paid for by the owner, so it was a verifiable personal credential. It was simple, no certificate, no work. That was the ultimate proof that you had the skills and the right to be down there.
So when you look back, the 1966 rules were truly revolutionary. They didn't just write regulations, they built a culture of safety based on education, on practice, and on certification, a system that treated the worker as a skilled professional. But it does leave you with a big question, doesn't it? If this was the foundation they built way back in 1966, how has a modern miner's training evolved since then to face all the new technology, the deeper mines, and the completely different dangers of today?